What's going on YouTube? Username Kite562 here with another audio review for you all of The Tommyknockers by Stephen King. Now, I did the same thing with the dark half, so sit back and relax and listen to what I have to say about The Tommyknockers by Stephen King. Now, with Book 1, The Ship in the Earth. So for the plot of this book, Bobbi Anderson is a writer who discovers a mysterious event that gets discovered in her town of Haven, Maine. A mysterious metal object has been discovered in her town. Even after the strange discovery, more unusual things start happening in her town of Haven, Maine after the discovery of this mysterious object. What could it be? Well, sit back and relax and listen to what it may be. And so for the first side note of Book 1, I really like Bobbi Anderson and Jim Gardner as characters, since they're kind of like dual protagonists in a way in this story, so I just thought that was really interesting as a whole. And I have to say, I also appreciated that the chapters have titles and numbered paragraphs, like with the dark half or any Shirley Jackson novels, which I haven't read yet. So from what I've read, this is going to be a thick, detailed novel, which is a good thing for me to see. I also enjoyed that the mystery is slowly revealing itself when Bobbi goes to cut some wood in the forest nearby her house, which was her uncle's Frank's, if I remember correctly. And I have to say, my favorite quote from Book 1, just speaking to Muriel made her feel better, someone who knew who she was, who could think of her as a real person, not just as a customer on the other side of the counter in Augusta hardware store, or as someone to say how do to over the mailbox. The Tommyknockers, Chapter 2, Anderson digs, page 30. And so for my second side note, what could this discovery of the site where a flying saucer lays in the middle of the town of Haven for Bobbi? Even her elderly Beagle Pete had a bad feeling about it when the site was first discovered. And so for the third side note of Book 1, so Peter seems a little bit more active than usual. What other effects could Encounter have in store for him and Bobbi? It's given me some kind of Pet Cemetery kind of vibe as I was reading this book, so if you know that, you know. However, it was interesting finding out Jim Gardner had a metal plate in his head after a skiing accident when he was 17 years of age. And so, also the scene in the vet clinic where Anderson almost had the fight with Peter versus Mrs. Alden's Pomeranian, Eric, kind of got a chuckle out of me. I don't remember where it's at exactly in the book, but it was a pretty funny moment. And so for the fourth side note, so the forest Bobbi finds herself in seems to only have no signs of life even after digging further in the mysterious spot where the metal plate is. Turns out to be something much more. What could it be? I don't know. And so for my first question, has this ship been here for years, or was it just here after the earthquake in Haven, Maine, that Mrs. Alden mentioned in the vet clinic a few chapters back? And so for the fifth side note, Chapter 5 was a blast of a flashback chapter. However, I will say the scene with the umbrella fight and Arberg and Patricia McCardle trying to just emotionally rev up Jim Gardner. It seems, however, I don't blame Mr. Gardner for what he did to Patricia after she made that snark remark about Jim shooting his wife while he was drunk at the time. A lot of interesting information was revealed in this chapter as well. And so for my second question for Book 1, what are the Tommyknockers? Who is the Tommyknocker man? Could he be a mysterious alien in disguise infecting the people of Haven, Maine? These are the questions from Chapter 6 that I've just came up with as a whole. And so for side note number 6, Chapter 7, Gardner Arrives, is a really enjoyable chapter. Eddie Parker was an interesting person to be introduced in this chapter as well. And so continuing on from that, as I suspected, the whole town is slowly being affected by the ship's green light. Bobbi lost 30 pounds, but is able to make a special typewriter that writes out her thoughts as she reads from them. Furthermore, I've also noticed that Jim Gardner isn't affected by the ship's light, which is also an interesting sight to see as a whole as well. And so for my final thoughts on book 1, solid B sci-fi horror story so far. I can see why Mr. King wanted to go back and adjust some things in this story, because I can definitely see what he meant about this story had some potential or something around those lines. I mean, I heard it in an interview somewhere, but I just don't remember where, but feel free to leave down in the comments below of what you think. So let's get on with book 2. Book 2. Now, with book 2, Tales of Haven, for the plot of book 2 of the Tommyknockers, it's more of a backstory of how Haven, Maine came to be in 1816. A man named Hugh Kane, not Huey Kane from Scary Movie 2, so please get your mind out of the gutter. So, again, it's more of a backstory of Haven, Maine came to be in 1816. A man named Hugh Kane purchased Montville Plantation, where Haven is now. However, why did this one location go through so many changes over the years? Could the ship have been there for longer than we realize? And so for the first side note, it seems that this particular piece of land has its fair share of bloodshed over the years, while also attracting more woodworkers or hard laborers in the general to keep the town running. However, when the town changed its name from Ilium to Haven, a family lost their lives, a Paul and Cora Clardian, and their infant son with blue and black hair. So my question here is, could the land also be cursed by the first founder, Hugh Kane? That was my question here after reading the chapter from this second book of the Tommyknockers. Now, the book that I read from is a Signet fiction version. I have it in my community tab. And so back to the review. And so for the second side note, I love how part 2 of this novel kind of turns into a collection of story experiences or short stories of what's happening to other residents of Haven, Maine. Examples being what happened to Joe and Becca Paulson when Becca thought the picture of Jesus on the TV was talking to Becca directly, which was quite humorous with how it played out, in my opinion. And so for the third side note, Ruth McCausland's chapter in chapter 5 really caught my attention this time. The chapter itself felt like a horror thriller story in one end, when Ruth tried to get her mail situation worked out, to then symbolizing Ruth's elaborate and well decorated doll collection. So it's kind of like a creepy porcelain doll collection. I mean, how can you not find those dolls creepy in general? Ooh, just it gives me the heebie-jeebies here, even talking about it to you all. So, but again, it's like a horror and thriller story in one end, when Ruth tried to get her mail situation worked out, to then symbolizing Ruth's elaborate and well-decorated doll collection. Some things were built for that room by her husband, Ralph McCausland, before passing away from a brain tumor before he turned to 37, according to chapter 5 of this book. And so for my final thoughts on book 2, I really enjoyed the chapters featuring Becca Paulson and Ruth McCausland, moments within book 2 of the Tommyknockers, and those are the really shining examples of this book. It's kind of a B horror guilty pleasure as I read it. So, I mean, it's nothing too crazy, but let's get on with book 3. Now, for book 3, it's titled, most lovingly, The Tommyknockers. And for the plot of this one, it seems that Bobbi's sister Ann Anderson is taking a flight to visit her sister. What could Ann's true intentions be for this little reunion between siblings? I don't have a good feeling about it, guys. I really don't. So let's get on with it. So for side note number 1, I feel like part 3 of this book is going to take a Silent Hill 2-like approach. However, instead of personal demons solidifying into reality, it's the residents of Haven, Maine being mind controlled by something otherworldly. And so for the second side note, Ann Anderson is another fictional character I hate with every fiber of my being. Her attitude was just disgusting to me. And man, chapter 4, the shed of book 3 of the Tommyknockers, was great with its descriptions of the situation that Jim Gardner found himself in. The way that the chords were described and with what happened with Pete and Ann was just ugh. And this book was short for book 3. So for my final thoughts, it was an alright sci-fi horror story. Not my favorite King novel, but I do recommend you check it out at your local library or something, or borrow it from a friend. Some moments reminded me of Resident Evil Director's Cut as well, like that's the thing about the Tommyknockers here. It's a guilty pleasure horror story, but it's really solid at some points, so I really like that about the story as well. But I have to say, I recommend the Tommyknockers. So I'm your host, Kite562, signing out. Be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed the content on this channel. Again, I'm your host, Kite562, and the version of the Tommyknockers that I read from is like with the dark half. So I'll leave a link to a copy of that review on the top right of this video. The Tommyknockers version that I read from is an old Signet Fiction, Signet Publishing version. I left a picture of it on the community tab of my channel. So yeah, I'm your host, Kite562. Be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe if you enjoy the content on this channel. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, everybody. Later.